The harsh wind howled through the dense pine forest of Yellowstone as a ranger Kai Blackwood trudged through the fresh snow, following unusual tracks that didn't quite match the patterns he'd seen in his 15 years of wildlife monitoring. The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds, casting an eerie gray light across the landscape. Something wasn't right. The forest was too quiet, missing its usual symphony of bird calls and rustling branches. Kai pulled his jacket tighter, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he crouched to examine the tracks more closely. These weren't just any bear prints. They belonged to a massive grizzly. But the pattern was erratic, desperate almost. His trained eye noticed something else that made his heart skip a beat. Smaller tracks. Definitely cubs, but they didn't belong to a grizzly. These were black bear cubs' prints, and they were fresh. The radio at his belt crackled to life. "Kai, we've got another report of missing black bear cubs from the eastern ridge. Third one this month." The voice of his colleague, Maya Chen, carried a note of concern he'd never heard before. Kai's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his radio, his mind racing with possibilities. In all his years as a ranger, he'd never encountered anything like this. "Copy that, Maya. I'm tracking something strange here in Sector 7. These prints—" He paused, noticing dark spots in the snow ahead. "Wait a minute." As he moved closer, his flashlight revealed drops of blood in the snow, leading deeper into the shadow of the forest. The wind picked up, carrying with it a sound that made his skin crawl. A deep, mournful growl, unlike anything he'd ever heard from a grizzly bear. Kai knew he should wait for backup, but something about those tracks and that sound pulled him forward. As he carefully made his way through the trees, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about these magnificent creatures. The blood trail led to a clearing ahead, where the trees opened up to reveal a sight that would forever change his understanding of wild animals. The massive grizzly stood in the center of the clearing, her fur matted with snow and ice. But it wasn't her size that made Kai freeze in his tracks. It was what she was doing. Huddled against her massive form were two tiny black bear cubs, their dark fur a stark contrast against her brown coat. They weren't struggling or trying to escape. Instead, they were pressed close to her, seeking warmth and protection. The grizzly's posture wasn't aggressive. She was hunched protectively over the cubs, her body shielding them from the bitter wind. Kai's hand moved instinctively to his tranquilizer gun, but he stopped short as he noticed something that made his throat tighten. The grizzly's side was marked with deep gashes, still oozing blood into the snow. Around the clearing lay the scattered evidence of a violent struggle: broken branches, torn earth, and most tellingly, the tracks of another larger bear. The story began to piece itself together in Kai's mind, but it defied everything he thought he knew about grizzly behavior. His radio crackled again, making him jump. "Kai, come in." "We found 2 adult black bears dead near Ridge Point. Signs of a major predator attack. Any sign of their cubs?" Maya's voice was urgent, almost breaking with emotion. Before he could respond, a deep growl resonated through the clearing. But this wasn't the grizzly. This sound came from behind him. Kai turned slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs, to face an enormous male grizzly, its scarred face and massive shoulders marking it as one of the largest bears he'd ever encountered. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This was the attacker, and the female grizzly had done something unprecedented. The female grizzly immediately positioned herself between the cubs and the male, her own injuries seemingly forgotten as she rose to her full height. The sound that emerged from her throat was unlike anything Kai had ever heard. Not just a warning growl, but something that spoke of determination, of protection, of a choice that transcended natural law. Kai found himself caught between two of nature's most powerful predators, with two orphaned cubs' lives hanging in the balance. The male grizzly's eyes locked onto him, then shifted to the cubs. Snow began to fall more heavily, the wind driving it in swirling sheets across the clearing. In that moment, Kai realized he wasn't just witnessing a random act of bear behavior. He was seeing something that would challenge every textbook, every study, every assumed truth about these magnificent creatures. The male bear took a step forward, its massive paw leaving a deep impression in the blood-stained snow. The female's muscles tensed, her body language clear. She would fight to protect these adopted cubs, even if it meant facing an opponent twice her size. Kai knew he had only seconds to make a decision that could mean life or death for everyone in that clearing, including himself. Time seemed to slow as Kai's mind raced through his options. The tranquilizer gun at his hip would take too long to affect a bear of this size, at least 10 minutes for full sedation. His emergency flares might startle the male, but in this confined space they could also spook the female and send the cubs running into danger. The radio at his belt squawked again, but he didn't dare move to answer it. The male grizzly rose to its full height, towering nearly 9 feet tall, its breath coming in steam-filled huffs that crystallized in the frigid air. Scars crisscrossed its face and chest, telling stories of countless battles won. But the female didn't back down. She nudged the cubs behind a fallen log with her snout, her movements gentle despite the tension coursing through her powerful frame. Kai's fingers closed around the canister of bear spray in his pocket just as the male charged. The female launched herself forward with a roar that shook snow from the surrounding pines. The impact of their collision echoed through the clearing like a thunderclap. Snow and dirt flew as the two massive predators crashed together, a whirlwind of claws and fangs. The female was outweighed by several hundred pounds, but she fought with a ferocity that Kai had never witnessed in his entire career. "Kai, location now." Maya's voice cut through the chaos. He grabbed his radio without taking his eyes off the battling bears. "Sector 7, clearing near Broken Pine Ridge. Get the rescue team here fast. We've got 2 grizzlies fighting, one protecting black bear cubs. You're not going to believe this, Maya." The female suddenly let out a pain-filled roar as the male's claws raked across her already injured side. She staggered, crimson staining the snow beneath her, but maintained her position between the male and the cubs. The larger bear pressed his advantage, driving her back step by step. Behind the fallen log, one of the cubs whimpered. The sound seemed to ignite something in the female bear, a second wind that defied her injuries. She ducked under the male's next swipe and caught his foreleg in her jaws. The larger bear bellowed in surprise and pain. Kai saw his chance. The male had turned slightly, exposing his flank. The wind was right, blowing away from the cubs. His hand tightened on the bear spray. But before he could act, movement at the edge of the clearing caught his eye. Through the swirling snow, he glimpsed several dark shapes moving quickly among the trees. His heart sank as he recognized them. More bears were coming. The situation was about to become much more complicated. The female grizzly had noticed too. Her eyes darted between the approaching shapes and her adopted cubs, desperation evident in every line of her body. She was injured, exhausted, and now completely outnumbered. What happened next would defy every natural law Kai thought he knew about these powerful predators. From the tree line emerged 3 more bears, but they weren't grizzlies. These were black bears, and Kai recognized the distinctive markings on one of them. It was Luna, a female they'd been tracking for years, known for her unusual intelligence and adaptability. She was the mother of one of the missing cubs. The air crackled with tension as Luna's gaze fixed on her cubs, then on the grizzly who had seemingly kidnapped them. But what happened next would change everything Kai thought he knew about the relationships between these supposedly solitary predators. Luna moved forward, her powerful muscles rippling beneath her dark fur. The other two black bears flanked her, their movements synchronized as if they'd done this before. The male grizzly swung his massive head between the newcomers and his original opponent, clearly recalculating his odds. Blood dripped from the wound on his foreleg where the female grizzly had caught him, staining the snow with dark droplets. The injured female grizzly stumbled slightly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The fight had taken its toll. Deep gashes along her flanks still bled freely, and she favored her right side, but she remained planted firmly between the cubs and any potential threat, her determination unwavering. The cubs whimpered again, and this time both Luna and the female grizzly responded to the sound. Kai's radio crackled. 10 minutes out with the rescue team. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. Don't engage. Dr. Sarah Reynolds is with us. She needs to document this. Kai clicked his radio once in acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving the scene unfolding before him. The male grizzly took a menacing step toward Luna, perhaps seeing the black bears as easier targets. It was a mistake. Luna reared up, and in perfect coordination, her two companions split off to the sides, effectively surrounding the much larger bear. It was behavior Kai had never seen before. Black bears working together, moving like a well-trained team. But the real shock came when Luna did something completely unexpected. Instead of confronting the male grizzly, she approached the injured female grizzly. There was no aggression in her posture. The female grizzly watched her approach, still protecting the cubs but not showing any signs of hostility. The two bears faced each other, and for a moment the clearing was absolutely silent, except for the whisper of falling snow. Luna made a soft huffing sound, a communication signal Kai had heard before between mother bears and cubs. The female grizzly responded with a similar vocalization. Then, incredibly, Luna moved to stand beside the grizzly, both bears now forming a wall between the cubs and the male. The other two black bears maintained their positions, keeping the male grizzly surrounded. The implications of what Kai was witnessing struck him like a physical blow. The female grizzly hadn't stolen the cubs. She had been protecting them. The scattered evidence of struggles they'd found. The dead black bears near Ridge Point. The male grizzly had been the aggressor, and the female had intervened. But how had this unlikely alliance formed? What had brought these two different species together in such an unprecedented way? A sharp crack echoed through the clearing as the male grizzly stepped on a frozen branch. He was shifting his weight, preparing to charge. Kai could read the bear's body language. He was going to make one final, desperate attempt to break through their defenses. The female grizzly swayed slightly, her injuries threatening to overcome her determination. Luna pressed closer to her, offering support, while her companions tightened their circle. The snow was falling harder now, reducing visibility to just a few yards. Through the white curtain, Kai caught glimpses of more movement in the trees. His trained ear picked up the sound of approaching vehicles. The rescue team was nearly here, but would they arrive in time? The male grizzly's muscles were bunching, his massive head lowered. The next few moments would determine not just the fate of these bears, but potentially revolutionize everything scientists thought they knew about ursine behavior and intelligence. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when Kai tried to describe it to his colleagues, he had trouble putting it into words. The male grizzly launched his attack, but he hadn't counted on one thing: the decades of experience Luna had in these forests and the unexpected depth of cooperation between these normally solitary creatures. As the male charged forward, Luna and her companions executed a strategy that seemed impossible for wild bears. The two black bears flanking the male suddenly surged forward, not to attack, but to drive him toward a specific spot in the clearing. Luna herself darted left, drawing his attention, while the injured female grizzly, despite her wounds, moved with surprising agility to the right. The cubs remained safely behind the fallen log, watching with wide eyes as this unprecedented alliance worked in perfect synchronization. The male grizzly, massive and powerful as he was, found himself caught in a coordinated dance he couldn't understand. Every time he turned to face one threat, another bear would move to his blind spot. His confused roars echoed through the forest as he spun, trying to track multiple opponents. The snow swirled around them all, creating an almost mystical scene of dark shapes moving through white curtains of falling flakes. Kai stood transfixed, his hand still on his bear spray, as he witnessed something that would rewrite scientific textbooks. Through the thickening snow, he caught glimpses of what looked like practiced maneuvers. The bears were herding the male toward the eastern edge of the clearing, where Kai now noticed the ground sloped steeply downward. His years of experience told him this was no coincidence. They were using the terrain to their advantage. The radio at his belt burst to life. 2 minutes out, Maya's voice was tense with anticipation. Kai, Dr. Reynolds needs to know. Are you seeing any signs of cooperative hunting behavior? Cooperative? Kai whispered into his radio, his voice filled with awe. Maya, this is beyond cooperation. They're working together like a wolf pack. The black bears, they're using pincer movements. The grizzly female and Luna, they're coordinating their attacks. This isn't just cooperation. This is strategic thinking. As if to emphasize his words, Luna suddenly reared up on her hind legs directly in front of the male grizzly, drawing his attention forward. The instant he focused on her, the injured female grizzly moved with unexpected speed, charging into his left flank. The impact sent him staggering toward the slope, exactly where the other two black bears were waiting. The male's roar of rage turned to one of surprise as his paws lost traction on the icy ground. But the battle was far from over. As the male grizzly slid and scrambled for footing, his massive claws caught Luna's shoulder, opening a deep gash. The black bear didn't retreat. Instead, she pressed her advantage, knowing she had support. The injured female grizzly, showing incredible endurance despite her wounds, positioned herself to block any attempt by the male to regain stable ground. Through the swirling snow, Kai caught a glimpse of movement near the fallen log. His heart nearly stopped. One of the cubs had stood up, preparing to run toward Luna. The female grizzly saw it too, and what she did next defied every natural law Kai had ever studied. She quickly but gently used her massive paw to guide the cub back to safety, then immediately returned to her defensive position, all while maintaining perfect coordination with Luna's movements. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and Kai could now see flashing lights through the trees. But the scene in the clearing had reached its climax. The male grizzly, frustrated and wounded, made one final, desperate lunge toward the cubs. Luna and the female grizzly moved in perfect unison to meet his charge, while the other two black bears struck from behind. The coordination was flawless, born of something deeper than mere instinct or chance. What followed was a symphony of organized chaos, a blur of fur, snow, and synchronized movement that ended with a tremendous crash. The male grizzly, outmaneuvered by the combined effort of 4 bears working as one, lost his footing completely on the icy slope. His roar of fury echoed through the forest as he tumbled down the steep incline, disappearing into the thick underbrush below. In the sudden silence that followed, broken only by the soft sound of falling snow, Kai witnessed something that brought tears to his eyes. Luna limped toward her cubs, but instead of reclaiming them immediately, she stopped and turned to the injured female grizzly. The two bears faced each other, their breath creating clouds in the cold air. The female grizzly, swaying slightly from her wounds but still standing proud, made a soft chuffing sound. Luna responded with a similar vocalization, and then, incredibly, they both moved toward the cubs together. The rescue team's vehicles burst into the clearing at that moment, their headlights cutting through the falling snow like searchlights. Maya was the first out, followed by Dr. Sarah Reynolds, the leading expert on bear behavior in North America. They froze at the sight before them, a grizzly bear and a black bear approaching cubs together, while two other black bears maintained a watchful perimeter. "Don't move," Kai called out softly, holding up his hand. "You need to see this exactly as it is." He pulled out his camera and began documenting everything, knowing that without video evidence, no one would believe what was happening. Dr. Reynolds stood transfixed, her professional composure cracking as she witnessed something that contradicted decades of research. "This is impossible," she whispered, fumbling for her own camera. "Bears don't form social bonds across species. They don't coordinate hunting strategies. They don't—" Her voice trailed off as the scene continued to unfold. The cubs, seeing Luna, rushed toward her with happy sounds of recognition, but they didn't flee from the female grizzly. Instead, they moved back and forth between both bears, showing equal comfort with each. The grizzly gently nuzzled each cub, checking them for injuries while Luna did the same. The other two black bears had moved closer, forming a protective circle around the group. "I've been tracking these bears for months," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. "The male grizzly has been terrorizing this area, killing cubs and females. We found 6 dead bears in the past 3 weeks, but we couldn't figure out why some cubs were disappearing while others turned up." She paused, realization dawning on her face. She's been saving them, the female grizzly. She's been rescuing cubs from the male. Kai nodded slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. But she couldn't have done it alone. Look at how they work together. This isn't a new alliance. They've been coordinating for weeks, maybe months. He gestured to the tracks in the snow, pointing out patterns that told a deeper story. "See how the black bears move? They're used to working with the grizzly. They trust her." Dr. Reynolds had been frantically taking notes and photos. "The implications of this are staggering. We've documented occasional temporary tolerance between species, but this—" She gestured at the scene before them. "This is sophisticated social behavior, complex problem-solving, interspecies cooperation at a level we've never seen in bears." The female grizzly suddenly stumbled, her injuries finally taking their toll. Without hesitation, Luna moved to support her, pressing against her side to help her stay upright. The other 2 black bears immediately tightened their protective circle. The cubs, sensing the tension, huddled closer to both their protectors. "We need to get the dart gun," Maya said urgently. "She needs medical attention." She started to move toward the vehicle, but Kai caught her arm. "Wait," he said, pointing to movement at the edge of the clearing. More shapes were emerging from the snowy darkness. 3 more black bears, each leading cubs of their own, stepped into the light. Behind them, another female grizzly appeared, bearing scars similar to those of the injured female. Dr. Reynolds sank to her knees in the snow, her scientific detachment completely forgotten. "It's not just an alliance," she breathed. "It's a network. They've created a protective network across territories. They're working together to protect their cubs from the male. She looked up at Kai and Maya, her eyes wide. "Do you understand what this means? These bears have developed a complex social response to a threat. They're adapting their behavior, learning from each other, forming lasting bonds across species lines. This isn't just extraordinary, it's revolutionary." The new arrivals moved with purpose, taking up positions around the clearing. The second female grizzly approached the injured one, and they exchanged gentle touches, confirming Dr. Reynolds' theory of established relationships. The cubs from different mothers played together in the snow, watched over by this unprecedented gathering of protectors. But it was what happened next that would haunt Kai's dreams for years to come. The injured female grizzly, despite her wounds, raised her head and made a series of complex vocalizations, sounds that were immediately answered by every bear in the clearing. It wasn't random noise or simple animal communication. There was a pattern to it, a deliberate sequence that reminded Kai of something he'd heard before. "That's the same vocalization pattern we recorded last summer," Maya whispered, her eyes wide with recognition. "Remember the mysterious sounds near Crystal Lake? We thought it was some kind of territorial display, but—" She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen as she accessed their research database. The recording she played matched the current vocalizations almost perfectly. Dr. Reynolds was frantically documenting everything, her hands shaking with excitement. "They've developed their own communication system," she breathed, "a shared language between species. This goes beyond anything we've ever documented in Ursian behavior. The complexity of these vocalizations, the call and response pattern, they're not just warning each other about threats, they're sharing information." As if to confirm her theory, the bears began to move with coordinated purpose. The second female grizzly and two of the black bears headed toward the slope where the male had fallen, while others repositioned themselves to better protect the cubs. Luna and the injured female remained central, still working in perfect synchronization despite their wounds. "Look at their eye contact," Kai noted, recording every detail. "The way they check with each other before moving. This isn't instinctive behavior. They're actively communicating and planning." He zoomed his camera in on the cubs, who seemed completely at ease with both species of bears. And the cubs, they're learning this behavior. They're growing up in a mixed social group, something we've never seen before. A sharp crack echoed from the direction of the slope, followed by a distant roar. The male grizzly had survived his fall and was trying to climb back up. Instantly, the bears in the clearing shifted positions again, but there was no panic in their movements. They had clearly dealt with this situation before. "We need to intervene," Maya said, reaching for the tranquilizer gun. "The female needs medical attention, and that male is still a threat." But before she could take aim, something extraordinary happened. The injured female grizzly made a different sound. 3 short huffs followed by a low growl. Immediately, 4 of the black bears broke away from the group, disappearing into the forest in different directions. Luna and the second female grizzly stayed with the cubs, while the remaining black bears maintained their guard positions. "They're setting up an ambush," Dr. Reynolds whispered in awe. "They're not just reacting, they're strategizing. The black bears are faster through the dense forest. They're going to circle around while the grizzlies hold the center." She turned to Kai and Maya, her professional demeanor cracking with excitement. "Do you understand what we're witnessing? This isn't just learned behavior. This is sophisticated tactical thinking. They're using each species' strengths in a coordinated defense strategy." The sound of the male's approach grew louder, accompanied by the crack of breaking branches. But the bears in the clearing remained calm, the cubs now safely tucked behind a natural barrier formed by the larger bears' bodies. Through the falling snow, Kai could see dark shapes moving through the trees. The black bears were getting into position. "We've been wrong about everything," Maya said softly, lowering her tranquilizer gun. "All our research about bear sociology, their cognitive capabilities, their capacity for interspecies cooperation, this changes everything we thought we knew about them." Dr. Reynolds nodded, still documenting every detail. "These bears have created something unprecedented in response to a threat. Instead of competing for resources or territory, they've formed a cooperative social structure that transcends species boundaries. They're sharing information, coordinating attacks, protecting each other's young." She paused, watching as the injured female gently nudged one of the cubs back into a safer position. "They've developed emotional bonds that we didn't think were possible between different bear species." Suddenly, the injured female's head snapped up. Her attention focused on something in the forest that the humans couldn't see or hear. She made another complex series of vocalizations, and the response was immediate. The remaining bears in the clearing quickly and efficiently began moving the cubs toward the denser part of the forest, away from the approaching male. "They're not running away," Kai realized, watching their coordinated movement. "Look at their body language. This is another tactical repositioning. They're drawing him into a specific area." He pointed to where the black bears had disappeared earlier. "They're setting up a kill zone." The implications of what they were witnessing struck them all at once. These bears hadn't just learned to cooperate. They had developed sophisticated military-style tactics. They were capable of complex planning, coordinated attacks, and strategic thinking that rivaled wolf packs or dolphin pods. The scientific implications were staggering, but the emotional impact was even more profound. These creatures, long thought to be solitary and relatively simple in their social behaviors, had created something revolutionary in response to a threat to their young. A thunderous roar split the air as the male grizzly finally emerged from the slope. He was even more fearsome now, covered in snow and mud, his eyes blazing with rage. Blood matted his fur from various wounds, but he seemed driven by an unstoppable fury. The remaining bears in the clearing maintained their positions, showing no fear. The injured female grizzly stood her ground, still protecting the cubs despite her wounds, while Luna remained by her side. Dr. Reynolds had switched to video recording, her hands steady despite the tension. "The male's behavior is equally fascinating," she whispered. "He's showing signs of frustrated predatory drive. This isn't just about territory or dominance anymore. He's fixated on the cubs, but why? What's driving this abnormal aggression?" Maya was checking the wind direction, her tranquilizer gun ready. "We've tracked this male for 3 seasons, she said quietly. "He started showing unusual behavior last spring, after we found evidence of poachers in his territory. The toxicology reports from his last blood sample showed traces of unknown substances." "The poachers," Kai breathed, pieces clicking into place. "They were using experimental tranquilizers. Remember those reports from the Canadian border? New synthetic compounds affecting predator behavior." He gestured toward the male. "He's not just naturally aggressive, he's been chemically altered. That's why these bears had to adapt so dramatically. They're facing something beyond normal threats." The male charged forward with shocking speed for his size, but the bears in the clearing were ready. The injured female and Luna split apart in perfect synchronization, creating a gap that looked like an opening, but was actually drawing him toward the prepared ambush zone. The cubs were already safely hidden, their protective detail maintaining constant vigilance. Through the swirling snow, Kai caught glimpses of the black bears moving through the trees, closing their circle. Their coordination was even more impressive now that they understood its origins. These bears had developed these tactics specifically to counter an unnaturally aggressive predator. They had learned, adapted, and taught each other across species lines. Dr. Reynolds was rapidly documenting everything while speaking into her recorder. Multiple species, cooperative hunting behaviors, previously undocumented in ursine species, evidence of tactical planning, complex vocalization patterns indicating developed communication systems. She paused as something caught her eye. Wait, look at their formations. The bears had positioned themselves in a pattern that seemed eerily familiar. Kai recognized it from his military training years ago. They were using a modified version of a classic pincer movement, with the grizzlies as the anvil and the black bears as the hammer. The male, despite his chemically enhanced aggression, was being expertly maneuvered into a position of vulnerability. "We need to radio for backup," Maya said urgently. "If this male is really affected by synthetic compounds, we need a full containment team. We can't risk those chemicals getting into the local ecosystem if he's killed." But before she could reach for her radio, the injured female grizzly made a sound they hadn't heard before, a complex series of vocalizations that caused every bear in the vicinity to freeze. Even the male paused, something in the sound cutting through his drug-induced rage. In that moment of stillness, they all heard it, the distant whop-whop-whop of helicopter blades. "That's the Wildlife Service chopper," Kai said, checking his watch. "They must have picked up our emergency signal." He turned to Dr. Reynolds. "We need to make a decision fast. If that chopper spooks these bears, we'll lose this incredible social structure. They'll scatter, and we might never see this level of cooperation again." The injured female swayed dangerously, her wounds clearly taking their toll. Luna immediately pressed against her side, supporting her, while making soft vocalizations that were echoed by the other bears. The male grizzly shook his massive head, the sound of the approaching helicopter seemingly confusing his already altered mental state. Dr. Reynolds made a quick decision. "We have to protect this group. This isn't just about scientific discovery anymore. These bears have developed something extraordinary. They're showing levels of social cooperation and emotional intelligence that could revolutionize our understanding of cognitive evolution in mammals." As if understanding the gravity of the moment, the injured female grizzly turned her head to look directly at Kai. Her eyes held an intelligence that he could no longer deny was far beyond what science had believed possible. She made another series of vocalizations, and to everyone's amazement, the pattern was picked up and repeated by bears they couldn't even see. A complex network of communication extending deep into the forest. "It's not just this group," Maya whispered in awe. "They've created a communication network across the entire territory. That's how they've been coordinating their responses to the male's attacks. That's how they've been protecting the cubs across such a wide area." She pulled up a map on her tablet, fingers trembling as she marked the locations. "Look at the pattern of cub disappearances and rescues. They've been using the entire landscape as part of their strategy." Dr. Reynolds was rapidly cross-referencing data on her own device. The topology of the land, the seasonal migration routes, even the weather patterns. They're using everything to their advantage. This isn't just learned behavior anymore. They're teaching each other, passing on knowledge, creating a complex social system that adapts and evolves. She looked up at the injured female with new understanding. And she's at the center of it all. She's not just protecting cubs, she's teaching other bears how to protect them too. The helicopter sounds grew louder, and the male grizzly's confusion turned back to rage. He charged again, but this time something was different. The bears in the clearing didn't scatter or move to their previous defensive positions. Instead, they began a series of coordinated movements that none of the humans had seen before. Luna and the other black bears started making short, sharp vocalizations in a rhythmic pattern. The injured female grizzly responded with deeper tones, creating a complex harmony that echoed through the forest. To everyone's astonishment, the male grizzly stopped his charge, shaking his massive head as if trying to clear it. "The frequencies," Dr. Reynolds breathed, checking her audio equipment. "They're using specific sound frequencies in combination. Look at how it's affecting him." She quickly adjusted her settings to capture the full range of vocalizations. They've learned that certain sound combinations can cut through his drug-induced aggression. They're not just communicating. They're using sound as a weapon. The male swayed on his feet, clearly disoriented by the coordinated vocalizations. The black bears maintained their sonic assault while the injured female grizzly began moving forward with purpose, despite her wounds. Luna stayed close to her side, their movements perfectly synchronized. Kai noticed something else. Shapes moving through the trees beyond the clearing. "They're not alone," he said, pointing to the shadows. "Look at the movement pattern. Those aren't just random bears responding to the calls. That's an organized response team." He grabbed his binoculars, scanning the tree line. More grizzlies coming in from the north, black bears from the east and west. They're boxing him in using the terrain. Maya was documenting every movement, her professional calm cracking with excitement. The social implications are staggering. These bears aren't just cooperating in the moment. They've developed a complex social hierarchy that crosses species boundaries. They have specialized roles, coordinated responses, even what appears to be a teaching system for passing on these behaviors. The helicopter was nearly overhead now, its downdraft creating swirling vortexes of snow in the clearing. But instead of spooking the bears, the sound seemed to be part of their strategy. The male grizzly, already confused by their sonic assault, became more disoriented as the sound waves from the helicopter blades mixed with the bears' vocalizations. Dr. Reynolds suddenly grabbed Kai's arm. "Look at the cubs," she exclaimed, pointing to where the young bears were hidden. The cubs weren't cowering in fear. They were watching intently, their eyes fixed on the adults' coordinated movements. They're learning. This isn't just about immediate survival. These bears are literally passing on tactical knowledge to the next generation. The injured female grizzly made another complex series of sounds, and the response was immediate. Bears emerged from the forest in waves, grizzlies and black bears moving together in perfect coordination. They formed a living wall, their combined presence creating an overwhelming display of unified strength. The male, despite his chemical-enhanced aggression, finally seemed to understand he was outmatched, not just by numbers or strength, but by something he couldn't comprehend, the power of multiple species working together as one. But it was what happened next that would change wildlife biology forever. The injured female grizzly, still supported by Luna, approached the male with deliberate steps. Instead of attacking, she began a series of vocalizations that were different from anything they'd heard before. The sound was almost musical in its complexity, rising and falling in patterns that seemed to carry specific meaning. Dr. Reynolds frantically adjusted her recording equipment. These vocalizations, they're structured like sentences. There's a clear pattern of what could be subjects and predicates, modified by additional sounds that might represent adjectives or adverbs. This isn't just communication. This is the foundation of language. The male grizzly's response was immediate and shocking. His aggressive posture began to soften, his drug-addled mind seemingly pierced by the complex harmonics of the female's calls. Luna added her own vocalizations, creating a duet that other bears around the clearing began to join. The sound grew into something that resembled a primitive symphony, each species contributing their unique tones to create something entirely new. "Look at his eyes," Maya whispered, her camera focused on the male's face. "The glazed aggression is fading. Whatever they're doing, it's actually counteracting the chemical effects." She quickly took notes on her tablet. "We need to analyze these sound frequencies. They might have discovered something about neural responses that modern medicine hasn't even considered." Kai noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. More bears were arriving, but these were different. "Those are young adults," he said, pointing to several bears that seemed to be 2 or 3 years old. "And look at how they're moving. They're mimicking the older bears' formations exactly. This isn't just a defensive response anymore. They're running a teaching session." The helicopter circled overhead, its searchlight cutting through the swirling snow. But rather than disrupting the bears' behavior, the light revealed something even more extraordinary. The bears had positioned themselves in a perfect geometric pattern, with the injured female and Luna at the center. The male grizzly stood before them, swaying slightly as the harmonized vocalizations continued to affect him. Dr. Reynolds was practically vibrating with excitement as she documented everything. The geometric positioning, the coordinated movements, the complex vocalizations. This goes beyond anything we've ever observed in non-human species. They're demonstrating abstract thinking, strategic planning, and possibly even symbolic communication. The injured female's next series of vocalizations changed pitch and rhythm, and the response from the assembled bears was immediate. They began moving in coordinated patterns, creating what looked like a flowing dance of fur and muscle. The cubs, still safely hidden but watching intently, made small sounds that mimicked the adults' calls. "They're not just teaching tactics," Maya realized, her eyes wide. "They're passing on their entire social structure. Look at how the younger bears are positioned. They're learning specific roles within the group. Some are clearly being trained as scouts, others as defenders, and some as what appears to be teachers." The male grizzly suddenly sat down heavily in the snow. The combination of sound, movement, and coordinated behavior finally breaking through his chemical-induced rage. The female grizzly's vocalizations softened, becoming almost gentle. Luna moved slightly closer to her side, supporting her injured friend while maintaining the complex harmony of their communication. Kai couldn't believe what he was seeing. "This isn't just about survival anymore," he said softly. "They've created something entirely new. A multi-species society with its own language, culture, and teaching methods. They're not just protecting cubs, they're building a future where different species work together for the common good." A young black bear cub, emboldened by the calming atmosphere, suddenly darted from its hiding place and approached the male grizzly. Before anyone could react, the injured female made a soft, chuffing sound that was immediately echoed by Luna and the others. The cub stopped, then proceeded more slowly, demonstrating a learned behavior that seemed impossible for its age. Dr. Reynolds's hands shook as she documented the interaction. "This cub is displaying taught behaviors, deliberate, learned responses that go against natural instinct. Look at how it's presenting itself, the careful body language. These bears aren't just teaching defense and survival, they're teaching diplomacy." The male grizzly, his eyes now clear of their previous madness, watched the approaching cub with what could only be described as confusion. The drug's effects were clearly wearing off, leaving him face to face with something his natural instincts couldn't comprehend. A complex society of bears that had evolved beyond ancient species rivalries. The helicopter's searchlight swept the clearing again, revealing an even more astonishing sight. More bears were emerging from the forest, but these newcomers were different. Among them were several bears that showed signs of previous injuries, healed wounds, and scars that matched the pattern of the male's attacks. They moved with purpose, taking positions in what was clearly a practiced formation. "These are survivors," Maya breathed, her camera working rapidly to capture every detail. "Bears that escaped the male's attacks. They didn't just run away, they joined this network." She pointed to specific individuals. "Look at their scars. They match the attack patterns we documented over the past months. But instead of leaving the territory, they stayed and became part of this incredible social structure." Dr. Reynolds was documenting everything with trembling hands. "This represents an evolutionary leap in social behavior. These bears aren't just cooperating, they're actively choosing to form a multi-species society. They've overcome millions of years of instinctive territorial behavior to create something entirely new." She gestured to where the young cub was now sitting calmly near the male grizzly. "And they're teaching their young to maintain and expand this social structure." The injured female grizzly, still leaning slightly against Luna for support, began another series of complex vocalizations. This time, the survivors joined in, creating a layered harmony that seemed to tell their stories. Each bear's voice added to the complex narrative, their different tones and rhythms weaving together into something that resembled a primitive oral history. "They're not just communicating," Kai realized, his voice filled with wonder. "They're sharing their experiences, teaching, warning. The survivors are adding their knowledge to the group's collective memory." He pointed to where several younger bears were watching intently. "And look, the next generation is learning from all of this. They're creating a cultural memory that spans species." The male grizzly's reaction to this chorus of survivors was profound. His massive head swayed from side to side, eyes moving from one bear to another as recognition seemed to dawn. These were bears he had attacked, driven by chemical-induced rage, and yet here they stood, not seeking revenge, but participating in something far more revolutionary. Suddenly, the injured female stumbled, her wounds finally taking their toll. The response from the assembled bears was immediate and astonishing. 2 young grizzlies quickly moved to support her, while Luna coordinated a series of rapid vocalizations. The entire group shifted formation, creating a protected space where the injured leader could rest. "Look at their medical knowledge," Dr. Reynolds exclaimed, focusing her camera on the scene. "The younger bears are positioning her to minimize blood loss. They're using snow to clean her wounds. This isn't just basic first aid. This is learned medical behavior." She quickly documented the specific movements and techniques being used. "They've developed their own healing practices, probably adapted from watching each other's recoveries." Maya's tablet beeped with an incoming message. "The Wildlife Service team is 5 minutes out," she reported. "They've got veterinary support and a mobile medical unit. But," she hesitated, looking at the extraordinary scene before them, "how do we explain this? How do we protect what these bears have created?" The male grizzly suddenly rose to his feet, causing a ripple of movement through the assembled bears. But instead of aggression, his posture showed something entirely different. He lowered his head, then began a series of soft vocalizations that seemed hesitant, almost questioning. The injured female, despite her weakness, responded with gentle sounds of her own. "He's trying to communicate in their way," Kai whispered in amazement. "The drugs are wearing off, and his natural intelligence is emerging. He's actually attempting to learn their communication system." The significance of this moment struck them all. This wasn't just about one group of bears defending against a threat. They were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in natural history, a genuine multi-species society with its own language, culture, medicine, and teaching systems. A society that was capable of not just defending itself, but of rehabilitating and integrating former threats. Dr. Reynolds was already drafting preliminary notes on her tablet. This changes everything we thought we knew about cognitive evolution in mammals. These bears haven't just adapted to a threat. They've transcended their basic nature to create something revolutionary. They're showing levels of social complexity that we previously thought were unique to humans and a few marine mammals. As the Wildlife Service vehicles approached the clearing, Kai made a decision that would define his career. "We need to protect this," he said firmly, turning to Dr. Reynolds and Maya. "Not just study it, protect it. These bears have created something precious, something that could change our understanding of not just wildlife, but intelligence itself." The injured female grizzly made one final series of vocalizations, echoed by Luna and the assembled bears. The male grizzly, now fully free of the drug's influence, responded with his own tentative calls. The cubs, sensing the historic moment, emerged from hiding and approached the adults. Black bear and grizzly cubs moved together, already displaying the integrated behavior of their remarkable society. "We'll set up a special research and protection zone," Maya said, her voice firm with conviction. "The poachers' chemical weapons give us the legal grounds to establish an enhanced protection area. We can study and protect this bear society without interfering with what they've created." The first light of dawn began to break through the clouds, the snow finally settling. The bears began moving with practiced coordination. The injured female would get the medical attention she needed, while the others maintained their protective formation. The male, no longer a threat, was gradually being introduced to their social structure. Dr. Reynolds looked up from her notes, tears in her eyes. "In trying to survive an artificial threat, these bears have shown us something profound about nature itself. They've proven that cooperation can triumph over conflict, that intelligence can overcome instinct, and that different species can come together to create something greater than themselves." As the morning sun painted the snow-covered clearing in shades of gold, the bears of Yellowstone had not just survived. They had revolutionized our understanding of what was possible in the natural world. Their story would be studied for generations to come, a testament to the extraordinary potential that exists when beings choose to work together rather than against each other. Through the crisp morning air, the harmonized calls of grizzly and black bears echoed across the valley, not in conflict, but in concert. A new chapter in natural history had begun, written by the most unlikely of authors. Bears who chose to transcend their ancient rivalries and create something revolutionary in the face of adversity. The cubs played together in the fresh snow, already living in the new world their parents had created, a world where the lines between species had blurred, replaced by bonds of cooperation, intelligence, and shared purpose. In the end, the real reason these grizzly bears had been stealing cubs wasn't to harm them. It was to help create a future where all bears could thrive together, protecting and teaching each other in ways that would forever change our understanding of what animals could achieve.